Okay, and we'll see as the people roll in, starting from 11. Q&A's up. Craig has joined us. Cool. All right. I'll just, a few people are coming in now. Good morning, those people who are joining us. Yeah, we're just waiting for the rest of the people to come in who have registered for the webinar. They'll probably wait a minute or so, and then we'll get started. I think I can see a few names who've been to some of our other webinars, but this is in the continuing series while we're in lockdown. We thought we'd try and be as educational as possible and provide you guys with some material that is food for thought or to help you with your programs if you've already got a DriveCam program. Yeah, so these seminars are also running next week, and then from the week after that, which is I think the last week of May, we'll be starting another series of webinars on some new topics. And even after we come out of lockdown, which sounds like it'll be in the kind of July timeframe, we'll probably be continuing our webinar series, just not as frequently because we can all get out and actually do some business. So yeah, today we have David, who's going to be presenting on the Hawthorne effect. And how that relates to your DriveCam program and generally how to help you run your business with the knowledge of that effect and its outcomes. So, yep, that's what we'll be proceeding with. Just wait another minute or so for some more registrants to turn up, and then we'll get started. Yeah, I probably should also mention at the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a chat option and a Q&A set up there, so you can ask questions or you can just generally talk to us in the chat. If you'd like to ask your questions anonymously, you'll see there's a checkbox there when you ask your question, and then we don't even see who's asking that question. So that if it makes you feel more comfortable to do that, please feel free to do that. And of course, if there's anything that we don't get through in the seminar that you'd like to ask us, you can ask us about that at the end, or all of our contact details will be on the end, so you can contact us post-seminar. All right, I think we'll just give it another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started. So just while we're doing that, I'll introduce David. David Swords is one of our risk consultants who's been involved here with us started this year. And today he's going to be presenting his topic, which is the Hawthorne effect and DriveCam. So David, I'll throw it across to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Aaron. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time today. I hope you find the session informative. I'll crack on with it in a moment, and I'll turn my video off so you can focus on the actual discussion that we'll give to you today and follow along with some of the information on the slides as well. I will put the video on at the end to deal with any questions, so please feel free to put your questions in, as Owen said, anonymously if you feel easier about it. We look forward to answering any of the questions you may have. Thanks. I will also mute my voice from time to time when I'm taking a drink of water, so don't panic and think that you've lost the connection. It's just me trying to not sound as though I'm gulping water. Thanks. So today, as part of our driver safety and fleet processes, we're going to be looking at obviously using video for evaluation coaching, which is part of our business. But today is my opportunity to share with you information in a more general fashion that is based on the research that underpins some of our technologies, components, and also our service offerings. There are several research papers and individuals' published works that will be referenced throughout the session. And we'd just like to acknowledge that work is not our own, and we're not professional psychologists in any way, shape or form, but they do form the basis of our business. So today's topic is the Hawthorne effect and DriveCam. First, a little bit about who we are. Myself, I have over 25 years consultative sales roles across the commercial and government sectors encompassing water, utilities, ITC, and mining and resources verticals across Australia. And I've had 5 years experience in the fleet sector. Today, obviously, Owen is helping me monitor the chat and the Q&A, and we will tick the boxes as we go along to make sure we give you that information. So as a group, we bring over 20 years experience in driver safety and risk management. We are the exclusive agents for the Lytx DriveCam safety program. And our business, as from our name of DriveRisk Australasia and Australia, in particular for ourselves, we operate across Australia, New Zealand and Africa. We have in excess of 150 staff across these 3 continents. And as Owen said, I'm a risk consultant with DriveRisk Australasia. A little bit about our industry. The freight industry, as you can see from the numbers there, is quite a significant player in the logistics and freight area. Particularly the high commercial vehicle numbers is significant. But our traditional business model is obviously focused around the articulated and rigid vehicles. Sorry about that, we are like technical glitch. So as you can see there, obviously the focus for ourselves has traditionally been in the rigid and articulated vehicles, obviously including semis, B&A doubles, rigids, trucks, truck and dog, that side of thing. The significant number of commercial vehicles is something that we need to, as an industry and a marketplace, keep an eye on due to the potential impact in the future of chain of responsibilities. Like many operators of heavy goods vehicles, they are already subject to a lot of the legislation under the NHVR. But again, this will eventually, in some shape or form, filter into that marketplace. Now, while there are significantly more numbers in terms of the vehicles, they do have slightly different operating costs and different business models. But the common factor in that is that they do have the same level of risk in terms of their operations on the road, and therefore are subject to those sort of potential high risks on the roads and need to can expose their business. Similarly, the forecast for the road networks over the next 20 years is significant in that the current factors are that there's up to 50% growth in freight traffic between 2010 and 2030. And as you can see from some of the numbers there, when you have those number of vehicles doing those number of kilometers, the exposure to risk is highly significant. So the Hawthorne effect and DriveCam. So this is where our webinar today starts in detail, and basically the idea of the light bulb. That is the initial starting point for us today, as this test that was performed back in the 1920s was initially designed around observing the impact of light and its different levels and its effect on staff and productivity. As you can see from the illustration from 1925 here on the screen, even by today's standards, it was a significant operation. The business operated for a number of years in isolation and grew exponentially. In the 1920s, it had revenues of US 100 million. By the 1950s and 60s, that had progressed up to over $300 million. And by the 1970s and 80s, they had become a $5 billion US company. The tower in the center background, That's still in use today and still features on the company's website, although that business is now a much smaller operation and has reverted to private ownership after being a division of AT&T from 1984 onwards. The business still operates today, making things like amplifiers, CD players, and associated components and equipment such as vacuum tubes. So the actual term for the Hawthorne effect didn't come into being until a 1958 study, and it has been widely adopted and referenced ever since. The original study about the impacts of potential changes in lighting were done in the 1920s and 30s. What happened during these observations and tests? It occurred that obviously there were productivity gains, but in some cases they were short-lived and changed back to normal patterns, and in other instances they changed and maintain that productivity increase until an actual environmental change, such as the lighting, was changed again. Now, this is said to have occurred because the participants in the study, felt that they were being observed and that an interest was being taken into them, and as such, they responded accordingly. Other changes that occurred at the same time were obviously things like keeping the environment clean, workspaces, clearing the floors of obstacles, relocating workstations, but all were generally designed to see what impacts these had and whether they were for short periods or longer. So as can be seen there, the productivity improvements were significant enough to be able to be quantified and measured. Again, the reiteration is the fact that having the ability to feel they were being taken an interest in significantly impacted on the participants. The second test was the relay assembly test. And again, this was significant in that it took place over a 5-year period. So it wasn't a short-term test, and it was based on 2 teams of women in 2 different rooms, and the impacts of the observation on their productivity, both in isolation for the rooms, but also against the wider business, was measured mechanically by the number of actual relay assemblies produced. Now, there have been many reviews and studies over the years of the models, and that has helped form the opinions that grew from these studies. The differential between the 2 teams was found that one team had a manager who would actually interact with them and talk to them about the changes that they may wish to see. And by negotiation and involvement, various items of their daily work pattern were changed, and the flow-on effects of those were measured and then studied in detail. Now, things, as you can see on the screen there, from shortening the workday, increasing the workday, providing food during breaks, the length of time for breaks, whether it should be a 5-minute, a 10-minute, or a 30-minute break. All these factors over time were changed and manipulated and varied to see what those impacts were. One of the key takeaways from this is that one of the gentlemen who performed some of these tests and also later issued a number of papers based on this was an Australian, George Elton Mayo. Elton Mayo, as he is known, became a significant figure in this environment, as he then later became what was known today as organizational behavior. He is seen as a founder of the basis for the study of organizational behavior, being the human, social, and political problems of industrial workspaces. Mayo coined that the Hawthorne effect was a human management effect, in that it was a way or a mechanism for management in how they can make their workers perform differently because they feel differently. His idea posited that a lot of this was to do with feeling of free, of choices, ironically not feeling supervised, but actually more in control as a group through engagement. The third test was the bank wiring loom, and this was an interesting one because this was one of the tests that was actually performed and designed by Elton Mayer himself. The paradox of this was, while this study was actually conducted, it grew exponentially in terms of what they discovered. It was no longer just a simple increase or decrease in productivity. They then started to see that there were other things at play. There were social forces coming to bear in what was happening. Excuse me. When workers became suspicious that their productivity was being boosted, it might be used to justify redundancies. And as that then influenced how they participated and involved themselves in the tests. As I say, these detailed observations reveal that there were social groups forming even within the teams, and that added a particular onus on the performance of the group. And if we put that into context today, when we have things like our toolbox talks in working scenarios, when issues or items are discussed that are a risk, such as an accident or potential, when it relates to one's colleagues and peers, it has more impact and weight because of those direct social relationships. And that was some of the things that Elton Mayo started to see as a result of these tests all the way back in the 30s, was that these social groups played a wider set of importance in the operations of businesses. So all these supplementary tests over time derived these facts and the data to create a wealth of knowledge and understanding that has increased our ability to refine and apply them in context to our operations and business services today. In essence, it's not just one piece of research or data that makes the difference. It is the ability to combine and overlay those learnings and applications and those incremental improvements that have brought us to where we are today. From observed behaviours in the 20s, analysis in the 50s, and expanded studies during the 70s and 80s and to today, have evolved into today's technologies and outcomes. Some of those issues are manifested by feedback has proved that the Hawthorne effect is most effective when there is feedback and change for motivation. In that people who've received feedback on their performance improve their skills. One of the subsequent pieces of research coined the term the demand effect. This was in the 70s, and this was designed around the fact that it was able to suggest that people may be motivated to please, or at least please as long as it doesn't conflict with other motives or interests that they have. They may be suspicious of a test. They may look to sabotage the outcomes if they don't understand them. They may become just willing participants, or they may just look to go along with the flow of whatever happens in their social grouping within the work environment or workplace. In 1974, H.M. Parsons, when he studied the overlaying effects and overlapping data from the subsequent tests prior to him, he concluded that the Hawthorne effect only occurs when there is usable feedback. In isolation of just changing things without any explanation or providing feedback, it's less effective. So using video for evaluation and coaching. In our industry, it's not surprising that the most common process for managing and observing safety is the practice of having driver certification. So this is in a case where clients will pay for an external third party to spend time on a periodic basis with each of their drivers in their fleet to assess their performance on the road, how they're performing their duties, and what, or if needed, what changes should or be suggested or made. Needless to say, in a lot of these examples, clients report that there's high levels of compliance and safety in the observed behaviours and the outcomes in the business operations. So in a tangible and practical way, we have an employee being observed and viewed in the context of performing their duties and adherence to company policy and practices, the road rules, general safety. And I think that's certainly a replication of the Hawthorne effect in terms of its observations. In this scenario, the driver can choose to drive safely and to the rules and road conditions as he is being observed and assessed. He can receive feedback during the course of these events from his assessor and certifier, or he can take the consequences of failing to do so and not heeding any advice or observing those road rules. The key output of this is it comes to choice. The driver can choose how this happens. So it might be a policy and a procedural event that they're done on a quarterly, 6 monthly basis, annual basis, whatever, but the driver can choose whether to participate willingly to try to sabotage it and himself, or whether to actually perform the duties as they're defined under regulation and policy. So if we can replicate this methodology in a cost-effective manner, and obviously this is the point of our business offering and services, we know that for every dollar spent on our systems, we can give our clients an ROI of anywhere between $3 and $6 in savings. And again, this becomes a factor of choice again. When you have something that is quantifiable and real, you can make a choice to participate and take the benefits of it, or you can choose not to. So given the cost of having a coach in the cab all the time is both a financial impediment and also a barrier to doing so because of costs, we need to look at what alternatives you could have. So if we make it the scenario where cost is no longer the barrier, what would you do? If we can now resolve this scenario, increase safety through technology and service, there's a compelling reason to do so. It's said widely that the driver is the most sophisticated technology in the vehicle. I know sometimes we may choose to not believe that, but again, we are a complex creature in that we can perform multiple tasks multiple times in different ways, and it does come down to that psychological and mindset of how we perform our duties. So as we mentioned at the start of the show, we are the exclusive provider for the Lytics program, specifically the DriveCam technologies. And these allow us to provide a system that is an effective tool for business to enable safety. It provides insight to your on-road operations. It will increase the safety outcomes for your business, but more importantly, it increases the safety outcomes for your employees and the wider community of on-road users. In the same way as having the driver assessor in the cab, this technology equips the driver with choice. He can choose how to behave and what he does, and therefore control the technology. The system provides a wide range of situational data and awareness, and also some of the underpinning behaviors in there. In terms of the technology, specified events are captured and recorded, and they are triggered by the vehicle's behavior, amongst other things. So again, the driver retains control. It's his choice to drive safely, to the road rules, to the road conditions, and in doing so, he can control the technology. So if you look to the wider marketplace and the wider society, lots of sports and high-performing athletes use video and coaching to improve their performance and to reach the outcomes that they've designed for themselves in terms of their productivity, their performance, and the goals they set for themselves. So if many sporting and professional people can do this, why can't we do this with our driving community? So what does all of this tell us? Obviously, the Hawthorne effect comes into play when there's feedback or change in motivation. Video is widely used by professionals. The reason for both of these things is to help us to design a process and a methodology that allows people to change behavior. Now, according to a 2009 study in the European Journal of Social Psychology, it takes anywhere from 18 to 254 days for a person to form a new habit. That particular study also concluded that on average, it takes 66 days for a new behavior to become automatic. However, there's also another position in that there's a widely regarded basis for 21 days as being an ideal scenario. Now, this idea can be traced back to Dr. Maxwell Maltz in 1960, and he produced a thesis called Psycho-Cybernetics. During this series of tests and observations, he referenced that 21 days was the most common number as the observable metric both in himself and in his patients at the time. And specifically, he wrote, "These and many other commonly observed phenomena tend to show that it requires a minimum of 21 days for an old mental image to dissolve and a new one to gel." Now, again, you may have questions around why there are different perspectives and different ideas behind this. And again, that comes down to the fact that it's not always a question of one size fits all. Some see it as fact or myth. But given that Dr. Maltz's paper was published 30 million times, it widely became very well regarded as being a fact, not just a myth. Now, the bottom line is not one size will fit all. There are many different things to take into account. It may be the operational parameters, the types of vehicles, the types of role, the type of market that your vehicles and drivers are servicing. So there isn't a one size fits all. And that is, at the end of the day, the bottom line. Now, in order to form a habit, the 2012 British Journal of General Practice positioned that habits are actions that are triggered automatically in response to contextual cues that have been associated with performance. So a perfect example for ourselves is when you get into your car, you automatically put on your seatbelt. You don't think about it or why you do it. Your brain likes habits, and because you've gone through a process to learn that it's efficient, it's safe, it's what you should do, you then automate the action. And this is a key issue because what it does, it then frees up other mental resources for other tasks, such as being road aware, taking into account what your next action or your next step or your next job might be. You're creating a process where you're allowing yourself to become more alert and aware of what's happening around you because you're automating some of the basic and some of the more fundamental things that you need to do. So if we now look at a piece from Dr. Prochaska and De Clemente from the 1980s, that's called The 5 Stages of Change.
Excuse me, David, just before you get into this, there's just a couple of questions that come up. One's quite relevant to this. With all these, you've been tossing around, sorry, I'm paraphrasing this question. With all these times you've been talking about for people to develop habits, the question is really, what, for my reporting, it's obviously from my client, from a reporting cycle, at what time frame should I be expecting to see improvements from my drivers?
Great question. And again, there's no one size fits all. If you're providing adequate information and feedback, then the change in behavior should be rapid. If it's a basic requirements, such as you really do need to wear your seatbelt when you're in the yard or when you're on the road in the vehicle. That is a basic task that most people can get to grips with quickly. So you would probably see that happen within a couple of weeks, if not within that 21-day sort of conceptual period. If it's a more complex change in behavior, of which there can be many, obviously it might take longer than that. But again, we're not dealing with massively complex pieces of change. When we take into account different personality types and different age and maturity levels, some of these things through effective coaching will become easier and shorter and not necessarily long-term requirements. But as with all these requirements, it does require that positive feedback, engagement, and measuring and observation to make these changes happen. Hope that answers the question.
Thanks.
So with Dr. Prochaska and De Clemente and their 5 stages of change, the 5 stages were pre-contemplation, i.e. not ready, with no intention to take any action. Contemplation, getting ready, as in, I'll do something maybe in the next few months or the next 6 months. To preparation, i.e. we're ready, I'm going to do it, or we are going to do this. Into the normal parameters of action, doing it, and then maintenance. And this is probably a key point in reference to the earlier question. Learning and refining and changing is a continuous journey, for want of a better term. So as people change, their behaviors will change accordingly, and they may over time lapse and require the same behavior to be addressed again. So again, not one size will fit all, but it does require these different things to take place. So as we say, we then get to ourselves where we are now in a stage where this becomes a cycle. It's an evolution and a process that we go through, and over time we can make these processes quicker and more streamlined, because once we commence the journey, the ability to refine, review, and implement becomes far quicker. One of the big issues that we need to deal with as individuals and also as organizations is how to shorten those first 3 stages. Because obviously an individual might decide to put something off and not want to do it, but the organization will be that through commitment to its own safety processes or legislation needs to attend to those sort of changes in a far quicker. The thing that has been posited through a number of these studies is that communication and early engagement is a key process, is a key factor in changing these behaviors, these outcomes, and having these sort of safety programs successfully reach their objectives is through that communication and engagement cycle. So what does that mean for DriveRisk? Obviously, we look at all of these implications and factor those into our processes and our services. And where we talk about observable facts and events and information, we talk about being able to provide relevant and accurate feedback, and also a process for being able to coach and train individuals. So if we look at the wheel here at point 1, obviously the event recorder is in your vehicles. It records the events that the driver has been involved in, whether through choices of his own, through poor driving choices, or whether it's through external events such as other drivers on the road in front of them. But the scenario is the individual events are captured, they're sent up to the Lytix cloud. From there, our risk analysts, and we have dedicated analysts who review all these different types of events and behavior. We have a whole suite of event review options for our clients to choose where they want to focus and what they want to address first as part of that ongoing journey. These are then processed and provided back to our customers. And these are done so in a way that they are quickly and effectively and practicable for them to deal with the individuals or types of events that are being seen on the road across their fleet, and decide how to best implement changes to the processes to review, coach, and provide that constructive feedback. And the loop then continues with the drivers learning and engaging in the process so that they become better drivers or eliminate those sort of poor behaviors or risky behaviors. And then the process continues. So that refinement of enabling your drivers to become more professional, more productive and safer is a continual process that we support as part of our services. So if we'd like to just put that now into context of what happened on our roads in 2019. Many of you might be familiar with the Heinrich Industrial Accident Prevention Pyramid, in that there are 300 risky behaviours that lead to 29 near misses or events that result obviously in, at the top of the pyramid, unfortunately, one major incident or accident. If we now take the heavy vehicle road trauma information and hospitalisation data for 2019, unfortunately we saw 206 fatalities on our roads. And as you can see from the pyramid there, we've slightly extended this further because there are significant lower level risk behaviours that impact into this pyramid. But traditionally we focus on mitigation strategies around the near miss and minor collision part of the pyramid. But as with anything, as technology evolves, we find other ways of dealing with some of these equally risky but less severe in terms of their outcome. But again, they're still risky behaviours that need to be addressed and mitigated. Because obviously heavy vehicles are enormously exposed, as we saw from the numbers at the start of the show, in the terms of number of vehicles on our roads and the number of kilometres they're doing every day on our roads. And I say that one of the big factors in this is we don't actually know what is happening in the cab on our roads. We see the outcomes of it as reported in the pyramid here, but again, being able to address what they are and how they are is a big part of our business. So within our business, we operate two services. We have our driver safety program and our risk detection program. Obviously, the dedicated review process allows us to help our clients to manage and configure their event review options to address their specific needs. And obviously in our risk detection program, it's a similar process, but without the coaching element of our services. The technology we employ in the cab, the SF series device that we saw in the earlier slide, it now includes a technology called MV and AI, which is machine vision and AI. Now, with our 20 years of experience and the 160 billion plus kilometers of event data over that 20 years, we have been able to teach our algorithms to be extremely accurate and able to predict what's actually going on in terms of the four major behavior categories that lead to those risky behaviors in the 56 million and the 567,000 category. And we can actually alert and detect and promote that into our DSP and our DS programs so that you see more of what's actually happening on your roads every day, and then can take those practicable measures under chain of responsibility to help drive better and safer outcomes for your fleet. And it is a sobering thought when we think about the chain of responsibility changes to actually make a difference, and the enormous volume of risky behaviours that are happening each and every day. In my opinion, it makes sense to actually start addressing these proactively, because as we saw with the feedback from the studies, engagement, communication, constructive feedback will increase the uptake and reduction in those behaviours. And if we can reduce those behaviours at the bottom end of the pyramid, we have a direct correlation to the impact we have at the top of the pyramid. So using video for evaluation and coaching, if we look at the merits of the system and the underpinning technology, we can provide a framework for the driver to make safe choices. And if you can make safe choices, we can have a safer industry, safer roads, and a safer community. If everyone chooses to be safe on the road, our safety will improve, awareness and alertness increase. And these are actually ideas that are now supported by data and facts over the years, both from the observational studies and general organizational behavior studies, but also the data we see on our roads. Thanks for that. I'll throw open to any other questions that we may have, and I will start my video. Brace yourselves.
All right, thanks, Dave. So it's a couple of questions, but we've only got a couple of minutes. So I'm going to put a couple of these together. They're kind of quite similar. So how does this information help me with my new drivers? And the question at the other end is, how does this help me with my older drivers who are not super keen on any changes or particularly putting video in the cab?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. And like anything in life, you will always have variables. Start at the higher end of the spectrum. Your experienced drivers who have been on the road for multiple years, driven hundreds of thousands of kilometers, they know what they're doing. We're not saying that this system is about teaching them to suck eggs and how to drive and perform and operate their vehicle. They will know a lot of this, and just by natural ability, it will have minimal impact on them. At the other end of the spectrum, newer drivers learning their craft, learning their profession, it will aid and support them because, again, you're creating a system where they're getting non-threatening feedback, they're getting support and guidance about becoming better professionals. And again, when we talk about the actual technology in the cab, the device is only triggered by poor events or poor behavior leading to harsh braking, swerving, changing, wherever it might be. So the driver, particularly at the more competent end of the spectrum, with the older professional drivers, they're going to have less events trigger because, 80-20 rule, they're probably 80% of their time they drive the way they need to and should, and therefore won't trigger events. Versus at the other end, it might be 60-40 or something, but they will learn from those. And a classic one of my colleagues shared with me was a particular driver going around the same roundabout the same way as it's always done. Once the device was in there, it triggers an event. He was coached on it. Pretty soon, those sort of the neuroscience and neuroplasticity of learning a new behavior kicks in, and it's, oh, hang on, I'm coming up to that roundabout again. Maybe I'll change down earlier. Maybe I won't accelerate as quickly. Maybe I'll take a different angle to the apex of the corner. So all these things trigger that change in behavior that you need, and it's implemented where it's most needed. So if somebody doesn't need that support and guidance because they're not triggering events, then the business can focus on supporting and managing where it is needed most.
Okay, great. This is a bit similar, but I've got a driver retention problem. Can this help me with that?
Look, anecdotally, the numbers that we see from our clients would support an affirmative answer to that, in that you'll not get a case where you will retain all 100% of your drivers. You will still have some turnover for whatever being that is, because in some instances you might find people don't want to change. They think they know better than what you're asking them to do and ignore. And as a business, you will need to make those decisions and manage that person out of the business potentially. But what we find from a psychological perspective is people who are being engaged and supported have greater engagement with the business. If you are helping somebody to become a more professional driver, then he's going to have a more productive and longer career in that industry. So a new driver coming into the industry, and we hear a lot from our customers saying that, you know, it's always hard to get new drivers and to retain them. You know, this is a factor that can come into play. As a side note to that, the Victorian Transport Association runs a program called the Driver Salute Program, and that's to recognise consistent professional driving performance on the roads in Victoria. That is creating a peer group for professional drivers in Victoria. So it's a wider recognition that people can aspire to. Hey, I'd love to get one of those you know, mentions or an award, or be nominated for it. These are all ways and mechanisms of enticing and encouraging good behaviour and drivers to perform the way you want them to. Because at the end of the day, they're also driving around in a mobile billboard potentially for your business. Their poor behaviour and choices expose your brand. So you know, there's a mechanism there to engage with them, to quantify it. Maybe not to be so draconian. There's no one strike and you're out type rule, but it will allow you to adapt the system or change the system to reflect your policies, or use the system to maybe amend some of your existing policies to create a more better outcome for the business, to do what's practicable in mitigating your risks, but certainly drive that engagement for your driver group.
All right, and just the last question here. Should I talk to my team about the Hawthorne effect, or will this actually destroy the value I'm getting from it and kind of make it counterproductive?
No, it doesn't make it counterproductive at all. It shows them and highlights to them in that discussion that you can have an outcome and an effect for a variety of reasons. But again, it's that engagement. You're providing feedback. You're saying, hey, we're thinking of doing this. These are the reasons why. These are the outcomes from it. And naturally, I say, when we talk about some of the studies, you may always find a percentage of people who are apprehensive, but will go along with the program. You'll find people who are early adopters who'll be like, yeah, this is great. I can see the benefits of this. And they're into it from day one, supportive. And you might find a percentage of your staff that are a bit, you know, oh, don't know, bit of pushback. But again, we see it time and time again when clients are involved in on-road events. There's a certain level of comfort that, you know, knowing that the accident wasn't your fault, and being able to demonstrate that you were doing everything both internal in the cab and external on the road, that you did everything you can to avoid being involved in that event. You know, we get people saying they're really glad they had that in there. They could show that they weren't distracted. They weren't doing things they shouldn't have been doing. They were focused on their road. They were focused on doing what they need to do. And in terms of helping them exonerate their involvement in an event, we haven't had too many people after an event like that say, we wish we didn't have it.
All right, all right. Well, thanks, Dave. I think we're about out of time. So thank you, everybody, for attending the presentation today. I hope you found it valuable. And just a reminder, so tomorrow and Thursday, there's another 2 webinars, one on chain of responsibility and the second one on safety as a profit strategy. So please feel free to register those. I hope you get some value out of those. And thank you. Have a nice day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.